and I'm delighted to have Dr. Randel Everett here as my guest this morning. I first met Dr. Everett in 2008 when you came to be the Executive Director of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. And prior to that, you served as a pastor in Texas,
a bunch of places,
and Florida and Virginia, as you say, a bunch of places. And one of the things that I noticed about you was everywhere you went, you were always an initiator, an activist. You were in Virginia, you started the Leland Seminary there. You came to BGCT. We worked together on Texas Hope 2010, which was about evangelism and acts of compassion in the name of Christ. You went to First Baptist Church of Midland, Texas, and then suddenly, 2014, the Spirit must have moved, or that activist spirit came upon you again, because you left a very stable, secure, prominent position as pastor to start a nonprofit where you have to raise your own salary all over again. So something pretty significant compelled you to go forward and to start a new work, the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for letting me come, Tom. I really appreciate Tom. And at the BGCT, Tom was one of the ones that I spent a good bit of time with, because I liked to pick his brain. I knew that he was very cutting edge and would look at, he didn't have a traditional way of looking at things. I mean, he'd help us to think of some options that we may not have considered before. So Tom was one of the key guys, and it's good to be here in Houston. I mean, Houston Baptist, the Union Baptist Association here in Houston, is so important to the BGCT and to the kingdom, and appreciate what you're doing. I got a couple of guys from work with the BGCT who are here, and I've worked with them for a few years, and this is one of the first times I've ever seen them. So I never saw them around the office or out doing the state stuff, but no, I'm glad to have them here as well. Appreciate Texas Baptist. And our time in Midland was just incredible. I absolutely love the church. I'd rather be a pastor than anything. I mean, that's what I enjoyed doing. And the church there was just so welcoming of us. And we did a lot of changes. I mean, they still had pretty much a 50 structure, and they really needed a 2010, 2015 structure, and they did it. They did it themselves. I kind of guided them in it or goaded them in it, and I think they made some real positive changes, kind of keeping their same values and their same passion for missions and ministry. But
I know you love that role. I know Sheila, your wife, loved being a pastor's wife, but something changed.
Yeah, I've never done anything I intended to do. Well, I thought I'd be a pastor and stay in a church, a lot of years, and because again, that's where my heart was. And there were places I wanted to go that didn't go, but I don't ever remember wanting to go where I ended up going. I mean, these calls to churches and calls to start a seminary and even the BGCT, I won't say what my wife's response was when we first entertained the idea of coming to the BGCT, but it was emphatic. So that was not a career plan, that we had, but I loved it. I mean, it was an absolute honor to go and see. I spoke at the commencement at East Texas Baptist University last Saturday, and to see our institutions and what's going on. Farrell was just at First Baptist Midland, the hunger issue that our son's involved in now, and so many others. It's just tremendous to be a part of that. And I guess God probably, I hope He has used me to be a catalyst in situations that help stir up some issues that needed to be. And of all places, why you would go and become aware of international persecution of Christians and other religious minorities in Midland. I mean, of all places, that's one of the most unlikely places that you would think, out in the middle of West Texas. And yet we had a congregation from Myanmar or Burma that met in our church building. We had 250 every Sunday. Our church had a family life center and had a gym up on top, and it had actually a skating rink down on the bottom. And we had 250 from Myanmar, Chin people who worship every Sunday down there on that skating rink. And you know, for me, it's real claustrophobic. For them, they could jump up and down. I mean, it was great. It was just a perfect venue for them, and unbelievable. And then we finally helped them get their own building. And so here we were confronted with the issues in Myanmar, out in West Texas. Two other people that God brought across my path. One is Bob Fu. Bob and his wife were. He actually was an atheist. He's Chinese. He was at Tiananmen Square. He saw people being killed. He realized that the government wasn't his friend. He began searching. He came to know Christ. He and his wife both were put in prison for their faith. They escaped. They came to the States. He started China Aid. Bob is probably one of the most influential Christian Chinese that I know. He testifies before Congress. But he ended up in Midland. It's a long story how he ended up there. But becoming friends with Bob and hearing his stories, once you hear the stories of the persecuted church, you own them. You own. I mean, you can't. I mean, to resist or fail to do anything about it after you become aware of it makes you complicit in it, I think. And so I heard Bob's stories. Another one is Gatana, and I want you to pray for Gatana today. He had to be taken to the ER last night. But Gatana is from Ethiopia. His first name is Gatana. His last name is Gatana. It's kind of like George, you know, or something. Maybe not that creative in Ethiopia, but he was put in prison a number of times for being a Christian, for preaching. And one time he was literally hung by his feet upside down. They poured boil and oil over him. I mean, he's just unbelievable. And he never would have gotten to the States if it hadn't been for a Jewish lawyer in D.C., Michael Horowitz. And Michael Horowitz was the one who began to advocate for him. And Michael actually has probably done more for persecuted Christians than any Christian that I know of. And but when Michael Horowitz was talking to the State Department about trying to get asylum for Gatana here, they said, how is he being persecuted? And he said, as a Christian. And this was a Jewish lawyer from D.C. quoting what the State Department person said about bringing Gatana here. He said, Christians aren't persecuted, they're the persecutors. That was the quote from a State Department person about Gatana wanting to find asylum in the States. But you don't tell Horowitz no. And sooner or later he came, and then some people in Midland began to sponsor him, and he showed up out there. And we became very close friends with Gatana and about his work. I mean, it's unbelievable what's going on over there. Two of his pastors were shot and killed this year. We've helped with some of the widows and children, orphans of some of the ones there. But Gatana came into our life, and he has Watch and Pray ministry. We're going to go over there in July and do a training for 450 pastors there. But these two guys came into my life. Actually, this Michael Horowitz became a consistent friend. And
the Jewish attorney.
The Jewish attorney. He spent 4 days in our home. He and his wife did. He's Jewish. She's agnostic. She is Jewish by heritage, but she's an agnostic. She's a physician. And one of the things she said while she was there is she told Michael, she said, I want what they have in Midland. So that was a neat thing that, I mean, God's stirring their lives. But Michael was one of the ones who shared this crisis that's going on in the world today and really challenging us to be a part of it. And then one day, Congressman Frank Wolf. Congressman Wolf has been a congressman for 34 years in Virginia. And if you study about him, he has been the human rights guy. I mean, he's Republican in a predominantly Democrat region, but Nancy Pelosi said about him, he's my human rights guy. And so he was more identified not by a political party, but by passion. He's a Presbyterian. He and his wife, Carolyn, are strong Christians. They have always fought for the marginalized. Hunger, he and Tony Hall probably have done more, Congressman Tony Hall. They probably have done more on hunger issues than anyone that I know of, but especially the persecuted church. And one day, out of the blue, he called me in Midland. And I was going to eat this really nice restaurant at Chick-fil-A, and I was in line there, and he called and said, "This is Frank Wolf." And I said, "Like Congressman Frank Wolf?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Can you talk?" I said, "I'm pulling over." And we talked about 30 minutes. And in the conversation, he said, Congress is not going to act as long as the pulpits are silent. What's it going to take to wake up the church in America? And I thought, man, that's a tough question. And so we began having conversations together, and then one of the things he told me was that he was leaving Congress. He didn't believe the solution was political. He believed the solution was spiritual. During that time, God was stirring up in us. And then I think I have a quote here. Sheila and I were at a BWA meeting in Turkey. And there at our table in Turkey, Nabil Costa, who is, some of you know him, a Baptist leader in Lebanon, but really all of the Middle East. Nabil was there. Nabil's been a friend for 20 years, probably. We've been there. We've seen what's going on there. And then there was Mazin, who is a pastor in Syria, Baptist pastor still in Syria, right on the border between Syria and Lebanon, where battles have not taken place there yet, but people have immigrated to that place from all over Syria. And so most of the people living in this really dense population are Muslims. And Mazin and his wife and 3 children live in a Sunday school classroom in their church building. And they're doing a ministry to all these, especially the children that are there. Their dad's been killed and all these children are there. And then there was another man at the table, Ara, a young man who is a pastor of the only Baptist church left in Baghdad. Both of these men were trained at the Beirut Baptist Academy that was started by Finley Edge and some other missionaries back in the 70s or so, Southern Baptist missionaries. And Mazin looked across the table at us and he said, they're burning our churches, they're killing our men, they're raping our women, and the church in America doesn't even care.
Wow.
And he said, why? I said, Mazin, for one thing, we don't know what's going on. And secondly, if we knew what was going on, we would know what to do. And but again, it was one of those questions that I couldn't ignore. I couldn't get away from that. And Sheila and I came to the conclusion that we had to resign and take on this issue. The persecuted church, religious freedom, domestically and internationally, is our problem. And having lived in a number of places and having networks of pastor friends, not just Baptist, but Catholic and Anglican and Presbyterian, and I talked to a lot of people that I really trust their counsel, and they said the time is now, and you're supposed to do this. And so I announced our church. We didn't have a penny of support promised, and I'd saved up enough for retirement money to live a month or two, and but God led us in it. And I never doubted He was leading us in it. I did question whether or not I was going to do it. I had some, Sheila, if it hadn't been for Sheila praying, I don't think I would have done this. I mean, 2 or 3 times I said, I was not going to do it. And I thought, God, as far as I know, I've tried to do everything God asked us to do vocationally. And so I'm at this point in my life where I was thinking, okay, haven't I built up some credit? I mean, God, if I say no to this thing, I've said yes to all these other things. I mean, are you going to say, oh, okay, that's all right, And we actually were at a BWA meeting in Philadelphia, and we took a train down to D.C. to meet with Michael Horowitz and Congressman Wolf. And we met with them. We were coming back, and I told Sheila on the train coming back, I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I know what it's like to start something new. I know this could be a dangerous thing, being involved in this situation. And I said, I'm just not the place where I'm going to do it. So I got back to the hotel, and I just turned the television on to lose myself. We'd already settled on Wilberforce as the model that we wanted to follow, the 19th century parliamentarian who fought for the abolition of slavery. Got to the hotel room, turned the television on, and the movie Amazing Grace was on about William Wilberforce. I've seen it twice in my life. That was the second time. And I just went,
so God speaks through TV sets.
Yeah, even TV, even cable channels.
So there were a lot of people that God brought into your life. You became aware of the issue, you found yourself answering the question, why isn't the church in America doing anything? And you said two things. One, we don't know about it.
Yeah.
And then two, we wouldn't know what to do if we did know about it. Mm-hmm. Those two questions are kind of at the heart of what the Wilberforce Initiative is about, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden, when God's working in your life, things come at you from every direction. It can be acquaintances, but some of the scriptures too that came to me. Here's a statement of Os Guinness. I don't know if y'all know of Os Guinness. He's someone that we've known for quite a while up in Northern Virginia. But evidence reveals that restrictions of religious freedom, a fundamental human right, are a growing problem across most of the nations of the world. And that's a map there that Pew Research did that shows the areas of persecution. And over 70%, and it's probably closer to 75% of the world live in places where there's religious restriction, discrimination, or ongoing persecution. What we take for granted is remarkable. I mean, there are very few people that we will encounter who have that. And then this is one of the scriptures. I was preaching on that text, Luke 4:18 and 19. And when Jesus announced his ministry, he said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is why I'm here. And I was preaching that text, and I thought, when are we going to get around to doing what Jesus did? So much of what I do didn't have anything to do with that. Preaching the gospel to the poor, release to the captives, recover sight to the blind, set free those who are oppressed. And it just broke me. It tore me up that the church needs to be doing what Jesus was doing. We're praying for spiritual awakening. You would assume that spiritual awakening is going to take place where God's working. If you want to know where God's working, then look at this. So I don't think we're going to experience, in my opinion, I don't think we're going to experience spiritual awakening sitting in our comfortable, affluent church buildings, because I think spiritual awakening typically happens among the poor, or the young, or those who know they've been rescued, and not among the complacent. And a lot of what we wanted for spiritual awakening, I wanted the blessings of spiritual awakening. I didn't really want an awakening. I didn't want to love people like Jesus does. And so that scripture really got me. And then this is the other one. Another one. I was preaching through Hebrews, again, Hebrews 13:3. Remember the prisoners. Now, the Great Commission. We all know the Great Commission. If you don't know the Great Commission, then you're not called. You're probably not saved. But anyway, we all know the Great Commission, and we know that there's a command in the Great Commission, and that is make disciples. And if you look at the Greek, it's an imperative, second person plural. So we all know we're commanded to make disciples. So is the word remember. The word remember is an imperative command. It's second person plural. And the same scripture that commands us to make disciples commands us to remember the prisoners. Well, you see, and those who are ill-treated as though because you yourselves are in the body. So it's really talking about those who are in prison for Christ's sake. I think we're to minister to prisoners who are there for other reasons as well. But I think specifically it's saying we own this. And so if there's a brother or sister in prison in China, and there are quite a few, it's our problem. And we're commanded to do something about it. So if individually and as a church, if we're not specifically praying and involved in the lives of persecuted people, I believe our church is sinning against God. And so, how do you escape that?
Well, I don't think you can. I think there's a whole lot on the what's going on end that I think you can help us with. But again, let me come back to just kind of the why Wilberforce. Why did you believe that you needed to stop what you were doing, start this new initiative? What is it that you're trying to accomplish with Wilberforce? Yeah.
Well, one thing I want us to do, and this is, I hope y'all got a brochure. These cost a lot of money, so take these with you if you will. But hopefully this will show you, tell you what we're trying to do, and give you some information about, and it tells you who's on our staff and stuff. And this is another one that we're talking about, a Wilberforce Alliance. So pick those up. And by the way, one other thing, we send out a Wilberforce alert every week by email, and if you would sign up and give us your email address, I'll take that back tonight. I go back to Falls Church tonight, and we'll put that in the system. But I would love to be able to send you those Wilberforce alerts. So you just need your name and your email address. Well, the person of Wilberforce was one of the examples. 19th century, and he spent. But a part of understanding Wilberforce is understanding the context in which he lived. It was during the middle of a Great Awakening. Is the preaching of Whitefield and John and Charles Wesley. And so the church was being stirred up, and people began to see slaves as humans, as people created in the image and likeness of God. And it's hard for us to believe that anyone could not see them as humans, but it was obvious that they did. And so here he was like 21 years old when he started serving in Parliament. He spent all of his life, finally slavery was abolished 4 days before he died. He gave his whole life to it. But I love the way he did it. He put together a coalition of persons. It wasn't just him. You had preachers, you had politicians, but Hannah Smith, she's a poet. And God used her writing in a tremendous way. She's a part of this Clapham Circle, that they called, because they all lived there in that one community. And so bringing all these different people together, university professors, and these brilliant minds, they came together to tackle this. And so sometimes he'd build coalitions with people that he was against on other issues, but they would find favor on the slavery issue. And so he's very shrewd, but very compassionate and very persistent. And so he became a model for us. And so we did some research, and we looked at a lot of nonprofits, we looked at what was going on in the world, and we saw that even though there are some wonderful ministries that are out there doing some stuff like this, and we're building partnerships with them, the vacuum was still incredible, and the need was urgent. It's not like, let's do this in 5 years. I think religious freedom domestically and internationally, it's right now. We've got to do things right now.
Well, I think when you explained to the church, First Midland, that you were leaving to start the Wilberforce Initiative, you said that you believe that the religious persecution issue is probably the preeminent issue of our time. Is that right?
I believe it is. And of course, when I announced that we were leaving, they were so relieved. It was, they thought this guy's going to be here till he's 80 if we're not careful. But I don't think they anticipated that, because we hadn't anticipated it. But within a few weeks, they knew it was right. The church, if it hadn't been for the church, we wouldn't have been able to do this. They've come and given us the kind of financial support to start strong, but prayer support. But again, that's who that church is, and that's who a lot of other churches are in Midland. And so it made sense to them, and with Gatana and Bob Fu and others that are there. We were already an asylum place for Chinese Christians who had fled China. We had some living in church houses that we owned, and so I think the church understood that we weren't leaving to leave them. Hopefully that they could be a part of this Wilberforce movement as well.
Okay, so you chose Wilberforce as a model, and a big part of what he did was attempt to build coalitions. Is that what you're trying to do? Absolutely, yeah. And this Frank Wolf became. Let me back up here and just show their model was education to raise religious and political awareness, policy engagement, and collaborative partnerships. And you've got to do all those things. A lot of times the church doesn't want to get involved in political issues, and so someone else is going to write the script for us. So obviously we do, but a lot of times we're just very reactive in the way that we deal with issues that come up. We never anticipate them. And so we really felt like we needed to put together a coalition of people who are informed, who have good data, and that can be made available to us. So who's part of your coalition? Frank Wolf was we came up with that's our logo, and that's our name.
But Frank Wolf was continued to be a part of this conversation, and initially Michael Horowitz and Frank Wolf and I were going to do this together, the three of us. And because Michael is Jewish, we just weren't able to do that. I mean, he has been, even to this day, is one of the most instrumental people in my life in that. But even like our statement of faith, if you go to our website, is the Apostles' Creed, with something about baptism added on. They didn't get to that, but that's our faith statement. And Michael couldn't go there because he wasn't a Christian yet. And pray for him. He lives Matthew 25 better than I ever do. But he just, to say yes to Jesus, he's saying no to his whole heritage. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to him till midnight. I've stayed in his home. He stayed in my home. We're close friends. But he still is a consultant for us. So that left Frank and me to be the kind of anchor Wilberforce. We began to put a team together. Ellen Vaughn, who co-wrote most of Chuck Colson's book, is on our staff. Elijah Brown, who's a professor at East Texas Baptist. Elijah is unbelievable. I mean, his name means speak truth to power, and that's why his parents named him. And so he's on our staff. It's just the lady who is our communications director had been the CEO and president of a media company in D.C., of which the Weekly Standard was a part. So she said she's Bill Kristol's boss. I said, I don't think Kristol has a boss. But anyway, so she was making $400,000 a year, being CEO, and so she now is learning how to live like the rest of us. But I mean, God put this team together. It was crazy, and so we didn't have offices until December. We're renting them at the BWA building. I still live in Dallas, in the Dallas area, because Texas is my base. But our offices are actually in Falls Church, Virginia, inside the Beltway at the BWA building. So we didn't have a staff or even an office until January. And so we were moving in the building there in January, and didn't have, our phone system was not set up, our computer system wasn't set up. We have a website. We're going to have a robust website that'll be ready by the end of this month. It's a decent website now, but this next one better be really good. But, and it's formatted for iPhones and iPods and all. So we weren't even set up, and Congressman Wolf comes in and says, we need to take a trip to Iraq. I thought, oh, wait, now is there an Iraq, Virginia that I'm unaware of? Yeah. You know, that's and I said, aren't they? There's a lot going on over there, isn't there? And so I realized, Frank's 75 years old. He wants to be a martyr, and I told him, I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to be a martyr, nor am I 75 yet. So, but within 2 weeks, 5 of us from our staff were in Iraq, and we didn't just stay in a hotel. I mean, we were all over Iraq. We met with all the key religious leaders, military leaders, and political leaders there. And one of the main things that we went to, and I want to get into this, just to let you know that there's genocide in Iraq and really throughout the Middle East against Christians and other religious minorities. And so we went to these IDP camps where these people were, and we did interviews with them. One day, well, I'll show you a picture in a minute, but this is where Frank is with some Yazidi. We're handing out coats to some Yazidi. The Yazidis it's a religious minority that lives up around, we met with them in Dahuk. They were over on Sinjar Mountain, and some of the horrible things that happened to Christians, even worse things happened to the Yazidis. But the good news is, many of them are coming to Christ at a rate that they have never done before in their history. This is like the 72nd genocide attempt against Yazidi people. I mean, they're just vulnerable people. And but because they and Christians have been being persecuted together, it's built a brotherhood between them. And Samaritan's Purse has given away like 100 times more Bibles in the last few months among Yazidi people than they had been able to do in previous years. So we ended up in Iraq.
All right. What else did you see on the ground there in Iraq?
It made West Texas look good. But this is a clinic. I don't want to bore you because I'm sure you probably are aware of what happened, but the Nineveh Plains is where Assyrian Christians have lived probably since the 1st century. There's been a Christian church, a Christian community. In 2003, there were 1.5 million Christians who lived in Iraq. Today, there are 300,000. And probably 200,000 of them are living in refugee camps. They call them IDPs because they're not refugees, they're fled from within their own country. Horrible, deplorable situations. ISIS came in and gave them 2 hours to leave. Now, these people, they were doctors and nurses, pharmacists, professors. They had houses, they owned their own businesses. Some of them had lived there for generations. Their families had lived there for generations. And at 9:30 one night, they say, you've got 2 hours to flee or stay and convert. And so these thousands, actually more than 100,000, fled Mosul and all of these other places. And it took what would have taken like a 40-minute drive or something, it took 10 or 12 hours. This is in August in Iraq. So during the night, people with brand new babies, elderly people, people with terminal illnesses, everybody who could fled. And the army fled just before they did. The army got word that ISIS was coming, and they threw their weapons down and they left. And so they were totally unprotected. By the way, the military had come in earlier and said, give us your guns because we're going to protect you. So now the people had no means of protecting themselves. And then the military was gone, and so they couldn't even fight back. I mean, they were totally vulnerable people. And so we interviewed, but this is a clinic that they set up. Within the second day that they were there, of course, some of the people were sick. And I almost became a Catholic while I was there. The Dominican sisters are unbelievable. And this lady, Sister Diana, I'd vote for her for Pope. I like Francis, but I think Diana would have been the best choice. And she's amazing. She has an earned doctorate degree. She speaks a lot of different languages, but just incredible. And so she said, let's get some of the doctors who also are homeless, let's get them to come here and start ministering to the needs. So on the sidewalk there in Erbil, the doctors started taking care of some of the patients, and then a Catholic church gave them their courtyard, and now these are little portable buildings that they brought in. One of the buildings is where the pediatrician is, another one is where the gynecologist is, another one is where a general practice is, and this one right here is the pharmacy. So, and that's 4 months. All that happened in 4 months. They just took initiative, but they're all homeless. They're all displaced people. And you remember the movie Schindler's List? Remember the little girl in the red coat? Everything else is black. And here's this little girl in a red coat. Sister Diana and this one priest who was there, they stood out like the little girl in a red coat. I don't think I've ever seen the presence of Christ more obvious in a person's life than I saw Christ shining through those two people. I mean, they were in deplorable situations, and they were radiant. By the way, this is an aside, but Wilberforce invited Sister Diana to come here, and so we sent a request for a visa for her to come. And last week it was denied by the State Department. Now again, let me tell you what happened. Several were coming over here, and we had Democrats and Republicans on the letter requesting her to come. It was not a political thing at all. She was the only Christian in the delegation seeking an opportunity to come here, not for asylum, but just to come and meet with members of Congress and others to tell the story of what's going on in Iraq. All of the others got visas. The only Christian did not get a visa. Now,
what's that saying to you?
I think it's obvious. I think Christians have been a majority so long in the States, and we're so powerful in the States, that a lot of people who have a secular mindset can't believe that Christians are being persecuted against, and even the president couldn't say these Coptics were Christians who were beheaded. Finally got around to it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just, I mean, people just can't get their mind around that. They just can't conceive that this is happening against Christians. And so a lot of people, even in our country, think Christians are the enemy. And a lot of times, I mean, we are.
Sometimes we act like it.
So a lot of that we brought on ourselves. But here, and so when this happened, it actually, them turning her visa down may have been a positive thing for us, because last week there was a firestorm of information that came out, and I mean, people from all walks of life were saying, bring Sister Diana here. Christianity Today mentioned that Washington Times had a really big article on it, and why wouldn't we want her here? And we'd guaranteed, I mean, we were paying her flight, we were guaranteeing where she's going to stay, and we met all the requirements of that. And so since then, the State Department has called us back, and we're working on another way to get her to come. And by the way, the encouraging thing for me with the State Department is Ambassador Saperstein is the new ambassador for international religious freedom, Jewish, very respected Jewish rabbi. And I had a chance to become friends with him even before I got to D.C. doing Wilberforce. And he is a very trusted friend. And I've already met with him 3 times this year. When we came back from Iraq and we came back from China, they brought us to the State Department for us to do debriefing. He's going to bring a new wind of ecumenism and really raise the level of awareness, I think, on religious freedom that's there. So Sister Diana, I think I have a picture of her. That's Sister Diana there with Frank. And you notice he's listening. She's in charge. These are some of the religious leaders. The guy on the left was the bishop of the Assyrian church in Nineveh, and there, I'm in the middle, and there's Frank and there's Sister Diana. In that same room were about 25 other priests that were there. We said, what do you want us to tell Americans when we get back? And they said, tell them we want to go home. And I said, but if we can't go home, we want out. Because they were just living these deplorable, I mean, the kids they just no schools, just unbelievable squalor. So that was the conversation with him. And this is Archbishop Warda. You may have seen him interviewed on 60 Minutes and all. He's the key Catholic leader in Kurdistan and northern Iraq. And we had a really, really good conversation with him. One of the things he said was, help us to build schools among the refugee children when we were meeting with him. These are just, again, some of the most remarkable children, and they're the ones that we went to the Catholic church that night. So it was an interesting experience for me as a Baptist going to Catholic church in a different language, and I never knew when to stand and when to sit, but they were just wonderful hosts. Let me tell you a story about this little boy. He's 8 years old. Martis and I share grandkids. His daughter and my son are married, and we've got 3 grandsons. And so this kid is Sam's age, our 8-year-old grandson. And we went into this one area where there were dozens of families living in this one room. The room was much smaller than this room. And they just had mattresses, like this one family had a mattress over here and another one mattress over here. And this boy was there with his dad. And so we began to interview them. And the dad said his wife had cancer. And when everyone else fled Mosul, they weren't able to flee Mosul because she had to stay there for treatments. She went to the hospital, and at the hospital, she was there for treatment. They said, if you convert to Islam, we'll let you have treatments. If you don't convert, then you can die in your illness. And her response, this is a quote from her husband to us, was, she said, this is not an exact quote, but it's, I will do nothing to shame the cross of Christ, even if it means I die in my sickness. And she left, and 10 days later she died. And her husband was holding this picture of her. We got another picture of him holding a picture of her, and that's the little boy. You can see he'd been crying. He was very fidgety. I mean, you can imagine he's living in this kind of environment. His mother's dead, and those are the kind of stories that we hear. Now these next two, these are two Yazidi girls. We went to Dahuk, and a lot of the Yazidi tribal leaders came and they met with us. I guess because of Congressman Wolf, and also because a woman who had been with the State Department in Iraq, they opened up unbelievable doors of opportunity for us. I mean, we had tremendous access, and they were ready for us, and so they came, and we were able to hear these stories. When we got back, we wrote a report on, it's called The Edge of Extinction. You can still get that on our website, but we came back and we published our report, The Edge of Extinction, and several million have read the report. I mean, it went everywhere. But when we were there in Dahuk, these were two girls. All the rest were men, and they were tribal leaders and religious leaders, and sitting around telling their story. Well, these two girls, look at their eyes. They were captured by ISIS for 100 days and escaped. They were among 700 girls in this one area. The youngest of the girls was 7 months old. They separated the girls by hair color. They sold them for $20 a piece and would reward them to soldiers or different ones. And one night they realized, and they just told us horrific things that were happening to those girls. And one night they said this is their last chance to escape. And so they were up on Sinjar Mountain, and the guards were distracted, and they escaped one at a time. And then they reconnected up in the dark of the mountain that night. And it took a couple of days for them to get back to a place of safety, and ended up in Dahuk. But that's their story. 18 years old. We asked the girl on the left, what were your ambitions? And she said, I wanted to be a doctor. And it's like our kids. And we said, now what are your ambitions? And she said, I have no idea. You know, just had been robbed of that. So we saw just horrible. You heard the story about the man that had an N put on his house. That was for Nazarene. And you heard about them labeling the houses. Well, the first man that had the N on his house, we interviewed him. We talked to him, and that actually happened. But you have to be really careful. A lot of the stories that we heard about what was going on over there did not happen. And that's why we want Wilberforce to be a reliable source of information. Last week, I got an email that said, it's from a key staff member of a very respected congressman, sent an email saying, ISIS has invaded Kirkuk, and thousands have fled to Erbil. Babies are being beheaded. Just a horrible kind of a story. And when I saw that email, I thought, this isn't true. I mean, we would have heard if it was true. So I sent them an email back and said, don't send this to anybody. Let us find out about it. And it wasn't true. It was a bogus email that had been sent around August of last year, and it keeps getting popped up back again. We didn't see any evidence of any child being beheaded. I mean, we met with a woman whose two boys were killed by ISIS. I mean, we heard the horrible things, and so you don't have to add to it. You just have to tell the story. And we lose credibility as churches when we tell these stories that aren't true. We read them on Facebook or Snopes or something, and we preach about it, and then people are there, doing fact checked on you while you're preaching, and they think, well, this isn't true. So they lose confidence in you. So we hope to be a reliable source of information, but what we saw was horrible enough.
How are you getting that information out to us?
Well, we have trusted sources who are there, and being there ourselves, I mean, that helped us to connect with them and hear the stories firsthand. But we are really building relationships. We have a tremendous resource, of a Jewish resource in Israel that we're getting our stories from. We'll have a place on our website that has news, and so we'll have about three 3 sources that are populating this every week that will be giving us, and I've been reading their stories for over a year, know them personally, met with them personally, and it has proven to be reliable.
Now, you've talked a lot about the folks that you saw in Iraq. And one of the things that keeps coming through the conversation is that while Christians are being persecuted, and that's a significant part of what's going on, you're also talking about Jewish sources and other things. I know you and I talked about what was going on in China, and that was a part of it, Taiwan particularly. Yeah. Can you tell that story? Because I think that's going to help us frame this conversation even more.
Well, while we were there also, we tried to document how many Jews were left in Iraq, and the statement among ISIS is, we'll get the Saturday people first and the Sunday people second. So that's their strategy. We found fewer than 10 Jews left in all of Iraq. And actually, we only could document 6 elderly Jewish ladies in Baghdad. From every source that we could find, that's how many Jews are left there. And by the way, Canon White, who was an Anglican priest, offered Seder for the Jewish women in Baghdad, because there wasn't a rabbi there. I thought, well, isn't that a twist? Maybe we'll all go back to Abraham and begin to unfold this and end up that's what Jesus came for all of us. But it was it is an amazing story. And in Egypt, I think there are fewer than 10 10 Jews who are there. And so our report back to the states and to the congressional leaders in the State Department was, it is genocide. It meets every definition of genocide. And so we're really calling on world courts in the United States to realize that this is genocide against Christians, and you almost see like a new Persian Empire with Iraq and Syria, Iran, obviously, and even in Jordan and Egypt, the influence there. While we were in Iraq, Frank Wolf said, "Let's go to the front lines," and he's lost his mind. I had no interest in going to the front lines, but we did, and we were 1.5 miles from ISIS. So I was standing there behind. This was in one of the bunkers, but I was standing behind the sandbags, and I realized, Marcy, I'm 1.5 feet taller than everybody standing here. So I thought, blind ISIS is going to shot me.
That's a good time to get on your knees.
It was. Yeah. It was. I never felt more like a target in my life. But I mean, we went there, and we even met with these guys. That's the Nineveh Plains Unit. This is like the American Revolutionary Army. These are all displaced people. Most of them had no weapons. I mean, we had people in our church that had more weapons in their own house than that whole, army had. But the very first day they were practicing, we were able to come and meet with them, and Frank Wolf and I got to speak to them. And some of them were my age, some of them were young. There are all kinds of professions. When they were marching, I've never seen a junior high band march worse than they did. But this 2-star Iraqi general, who also is a Christian, who also is displaced, who's leading them, said, "You look in their eyes and you'll know they'll do whatever it takes to get their land back. They want to go back to their homes." So we come back from there and we go to Taiwan, and we went to Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong. That's where the demonstrations were. And again, the demonstrations were led by an 18-year-old Christian young man, Joshua Wong. It's amazing how much one person can do. And I'm not sure if those protests were good or bad or the outcome, but I was really excited that these Christian young people, and almost all of them were Christian young people, stood up against injustice at tremendous risk, not knowing if they were going to be killed or put in prison or whatever. And Wong couldn't even meet with us while we were there because he's under constant surveillance, and we were a pretty high-profile group. But we had 1,800 Chinese house church pastors who came over from China. We met with them for 4 days, and we did training for them. We worshiped with them, but we also documented their stories so that we'll know what's going on. 200 were detained and not allowed to come in. They estimated that probably 10% of the people at the meeting were actually spies. They were there to document and take pictures of the people who were there. Several of them were there, didn't know what would happen to them when they went back. One man said if his wife was in the States and said, if you don't hear from me by midnight tonight, call my wife because I've been arrested. Unfortunately, he wasn't, but he was put on the watch list. But that's them. I mean, that was the group we spoke to. I mean, there were no aisles. It was like a building for 1,100 or 1,200 people had 1,800 people there. They came early in the morning. They stayed late at night for 4 days. When they prayed, they all prayed out loud at the same time. Mm-hmm. And we were praying out loud, and all of a sudden I realized I had both of my hands in there. I was raising my hands and praying out loud. And I thought, I knew the people in our church who did that, and I was suspicious of them, And so here, I thought, boy, they would have loved to have had a picture of me doing that.
Acts 2 moment.
Yeah, but it was an Acts 2. And they are having spiritual awakening. There'll be more Christians in China by 2030 than in the U.S. Yeah, unbelievable what God's doing over there. And yet, to a person, they said that religious persecution is worse in China today, last year, than any year since the Cultural Revolution.
Wow.
We met with people who've been in prison 17 years, some have been in prison 1 year, 2 years. In one province, we documented that 800 churches had been either partially or totally destroyed. For the first time, they're even destroying some of the 3 self-churches that are registered churches. Mm-hmm. I mean, some that had these beautiful buildings, old buildings that came in with tanks and just bulldozed these buildings. A lot of it has to do with which province. But the underground, even that though, has brought the underground church and the registered church together in some ways that they probably have never been, and that's an exciting thing. But we were just absolutely humbled, and then we went from there to Taiwan, and this is crazy. I mean, God's opened these doors up, and we're 3 months old. It's just no way that these things could have happened. I mean, God just put I felt like Forrest Gump. We were going in to meet with the vice president of Taiwan there, and I told Sheila, I said, we're meeting, I told her all these people we met with in Taiwan. She said, I hope they don't find out how unimportant you are. And so she knew. But the Taiwanese government has invited us to come and sponsor a religious freedom seminar in December there. The Buddhists are some of the main ones that are promoting this because religious freedom is strong in Taiwan. And so it's a regional thing. We'll have a few congressmen and maybe even Senator Cornyn, who said he would go, will be there, but also some people from the Philippines but we saw pictures of what was going on in Myanmar and the atrocities that are there. But we'll have all those there. But we met with him, the mayor of the second largest city. He's the one. Bob Fu is in the middle in the red tie, and just our left in the picture, that's the mayor of Taichung, the second largest city, and they're sponsoring this event. They want to be known as a freedom city, and they said that the bedrock freedom upon all other freedoms are built is religious freedom. So the very first one they're having is there. There's this Chinese newspaper, I wish I'd brought it. It was a Taipei newspaper, and one of their lead newspaper, and on the front is a big picture this big of the vice president. It's a headshot, and over here is a picture of me, and then over here's a picture of Bob Fu, and probably underneath it says dead or alive, I don't know, who knows what it said. And then on the second page is like 2/3 of the second page with our pictures again and story, promoting a religious freedom conference in Taiwan. It's just, I think the world realizes that religious persecution is worse than it's been. And the ones who value freedom, like Taiwan and the U.S., realize that we better do something now. So
this really is a bedrock freedom. In fact, if you go back to our own Bill of Rights, it's the first of the amendments that were added around free exercise of religion and speech. So it really is a bedrock thing. And I guess that kind of raises the question, you've made us aware of what's going on, But part of what you said was there were two things that were needed. We needed to know what's going on, but then we also need to be able to act and take part and do something about what's going on. So can we kind of move in that direction with the conversation in terms of, okay, I'm a pastor, I'm here in Houston. You're talking about something that's going on halfway around the world. And what do I need to think, feel, know, do as a part of all of this?
Well, one thing we want to do is to make people aware of what's going on. Like Mazin saying, the church in the West doesn't care. One of the men who was in prison in China said, you think you're in prison and nobody knows. No one in the world knows, what's going on. And so they're isolated. And so just to try to find out what's going on and let the world know what's going on is an important part of that. Those kids at Garissa University in Kenya, 147 of them were killed, and they were killed because they were Christians. And we saw pictures of them in the courtyard. I mean, these are kids going to college. Just because they're in college and Christians and they're executed. And the thing that happened in Paris was horrible, but at the same time that was happening in Paris, there were thousands of Christians that were being killed in northern Nigeria. And world leaders didn't show up there. And so who cares about Nigeria? 60 churches have been burned in Niger. It's just these horrible things that are going on. These Ethiopian Christians who were killed in Libya, and the Coptic Christians. This lady on our staff, Ellen Vaughn, just wrote the book about Mama Maggie from Egypt. Started all these ministries there on the slums, the garbage dumps. Six or seven of the 21 who were beheaded came out of their ministry. She knew them personally, and Ellen wrote the book about it. And so Ellen got that quote directly from Mama Maggie. So I think becoming aware, knowing what's going on, getting reliable information, and telling their stories. But another really key thing is prayer. I mean, we should be praying for the persecuted church, not just in general, but specifically as these things happen. One of the things that we're calling on for Wilberforce churches is to create an intercessory prayer team just for the persecuted church. And so we're going to try to get prayer requests to you. When we hear something that's happening, get it out there. So if you have 5 or 6 people in your church that are meeting once a week to pray for the persecuted church, we're not just saying, God help the persecuted church. We're saying, Lord, help Sister Diana to get a visa so she can come to the States and tell the story about the genocide. Or Lord, give the little boy's name whose mother died, and you bring him, whatever. But prayer is a very specific thing. And another thing is become an advocate. Now I don't know how, I want to leave some time for question and answer, and I want to hear from you, and I'm hogging the show, but there are a lot of domestic issues about religious freedom that are swirling around. And Michael Horowitz, here as a Jewish lawyer, said to me, he said, the reason he's so passionate about this is for his own grandkids. He said, I believe if it hadn't been for the church, I'd be a bar of soap or a lampshade. And he said, if the church, he said, I believe it's the church in America that's kept religious freedom in America. And he said, if America loses religious freedom, he said, I don't believe there's any other nation that will stand up for religious freedom. And so he's panicked about his own grandkids. And you see what's going on against Jews all over Europe. It probably more than any time in my lifetime. It just comes back so quickly. And so he believes, so we need to become advocates. But we need to become informed advocates. And that's why we need to try to get as good of information as we possibly can about these issues. We need to be planning in advance. We need to try to anticipate what these fronts are going to be, so that we can be ready for it, rather than just being reactionary and angry and sometimes half informed. but we need to become advocates. One of the things that we said we wanted to do was to inject religious freedom into the elections for 2016. And we're going to try our best to have a conversation with every candidate running for president and see Democrats and Republicans to see where they stand on international and domestic religious freedom. I've already met with 2 of them, but I mean, the way people are coming out now, that's going to be a full-time job, just trying to get around all of them. And but anyway, but we want to know. We want to know where they stand. And that's, again, if you have Wilberforce churches all over the country, then when these issues come up, then we can have advocates there that hold these people. We ought to be asking our city councilmen, our state people, our congressmen, where do you stand on these issues?
Well, let's transition here to the United States, because what you've described going on in Iraq and Myanmar in Africa, and you're describing that as persecution, no question about that. And a lot of times now we're seeing we hear Christians in America being persecuted, that kind of terminology. It doesn't seem like it's the same level of persecution, but there are some things that are going on here in the United States. From your vantage point, what do you see? How do you compare what's going on outside the United States with what's going on here? What do we need to do here in order to help protect religious freedom?
Well, I think up front, I think that religious freedom is a very important front on which a battle is being waged now in our country, and I don't think we can sit this out. But I think going back to our heritage too, we've got to realize it was Baptists who fought for religious freedom. If you ask a historian who's responsible for religious freedom in the U.S., they'd say James Madison. But if you ask Baptists, we'll say John Leland, because John Leland was the one who told James Madison that if you don't specifically put in the Constitution religious freedom protections, then the Virginians were going to support John Leland for the Constitutional Convention instead of James Madison. And Madison promised them. I've even been to the oak tree in Orange, Virginia, where this conversation supposedly took place. And so when John Leland and Roger Williams, when these guys were talking about religious freedom, they were talking about something that had never been done before. And we talk about our nation being exceptional. That's why we're exceptional. We're exceptional because we have religious freedom. And religious freedom is, in my opinion, the bedrock of every other freedom. Freedom of speech or anything else, freedom of assembly. If you don't have religious freedom. And then another thing that I believe is that if religious freedom is not available to all, if any group is vulnerable, then every group is vulnerable. And so a lot of times it's unpopular to stand for religious freedom, because not only are you asking for freedom for Christians, but you're asking for freedom for Muslims, or you're asking for freedom for anyone, Jews or Hindus, or freedom for those who choose not to believe. But religious freedom has been very important, and to have been able to protect that for all of these years, it's a very important freedom. But what happens so oftentimes, we have a short memory. We take for granted what has happened. We took our trustees. Our trustees met in Falls Church a couple weeks ago. We had a government lawyer who had been around D.C. all of his life, and he was about 70. He gave us a tour of the Capitol, a private tour of the Capitol, where he talked about all the Christian significance, and not just Christian, but Jewish significance, the religious significance in the paintings, in the statements, and just the whole fabric of our nation, and just reminding us all of this rich part of our heritage. Then we went to Mount Vernon, and the guy that's over Mount Vernon gave us a private tour, and he was showing us these things about Washington, very specific. We saw a letter in there that Washington had written Virginia Baptist. And Washington specifically stated in that letter his support for religious freedom. And he was very much a man of faith himself. And when he prayed, you see him on his knees praying, he's not praying some poem. He's beseeching God, right. There in a time. So you see this rich heritage, and we begin to take it for granted. And so, one of the big issues today is RFRA. And so, I'll just throw that out there because I know that's something that we all wonder about.
Tell us a little bit about RFRA. I mean, it goes back to, 1993, President Clinton. Tell us how that all came about and why that's important, because it is very much in the conversation today. It was basically assumed, almost a given when it was initiated and passed, right?
Yeah. In a way it was, in a way it wasn't. There was a ruling in 1990 that had stirred up some religious restrictions that caused them to come to do the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And so it was led by fundamentalists in the Senate, Ted Kennedy, Schumer, and Orrin Hatch. I mean, they were the sponsors of RFRA. So it wasn't some. I'm joking. These are people that wanted protection for religious freedom in the states. It passed 97-3 in the Senate, and it passed unanimously in the House, and it was signed by President Bill Clinton. And so what it did was, and it was primarily not a protection for Christians. I mean, it was a protection for all people, for all religious freedom. But at that time, there wasn't the sense that there was a lot of encroachment on Christians' practice of religion. But some of the minority religions, like some of the stories, the Sikh man who's a prisoner who wanted to be able to have the turban, the Muslim man in prison who was told he had to shave his beard, the American Indians who wanted peyote and as a part of their religious celebration. Those were the kind of issues that have come up over the years. Well, that was passed in 1993. Since then, 20 other states have religious freedom acts for the state, because the federal one gave protection on federal issues, but the states were not protected individually. So 20 of the states passed their own RFRA, and then 11, in addition to that, passed other kind of legislation that protected religious freedom. And so that's why I mean, it was not controversial. It was very important, and a number of cases have been decided on the basis of that. That's kept things moving well. I got some specific language about RFRA if I can find it.
And while you're looking for that, in my research, one of the things I discovered is most of the times that RFRA was applied, it had nothing to do with Christians. It was the various, what we would term minority religions here in the United States. It was protecting them.
Yeah.
It really wasn't even applied to Christians, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's the basis of RFRA was all Americans should be free to live and work in accordance with their beliefs without fear of government coercion or penalty. And what there was a real strong test there in RFRA that would keep from discrimination, using your religion to protect some rights that might be harmful to other people. And so it's been a very rigorous standard. Well, I think this year, Governor Pence and Frank Wolf are very close friends. When Indiana was doing the same bill that so many other states had done, Pence was stunned. He had no idea that there was going to be this outcry against it. And I think, but there had been people working on that for more than a year. I mean, they have been preparing for that. And of course, our landscape has changed since 1993. And the thing that changed the conversation there was really having to do with gay marriage. I mean, that was the issue, and discrimination against gays. And so that became the issue about which this debate happened. I think it also showed us, both in Indiana and in Arkansas, what happened is that the battle is not primarily going to be fought in Congress. The battle is going to be primarily fought in the corporations. It's the corporations who really came together, and for Apple to act outraged at what they called was hate language, when they're making millions and millions in Saudi Arabia, where gays are stoned to death and women can't even drive a car. Someone said there are more women flying airplanes in Israel than driving cars in Saudi Arabia. But it was just, but this corporate world, they came in, and so I think our new standard of values in our nation, I think it's sex and money. I guess it maybe always has been, but just wanting to live in a country where there is no restraints on any sexual behavior, or where greed is whatever causes a state to make more money or a person to make more money. I mean, I think those have become two of our gods. I read a statement of James Madison that put this in perspective for me, where he wrote a paper called Property in 1792, and if you go back and Google that and read, it's a great paper. But he said that government is instituted to protect the property of a person. But then he defined property as not just material property, but also property as of a property of conscience or religious opinions. And he said the one that has a particular value and is the most sacred is the property of religious opinions. And so this is the guy who wrote the Constitution, and put these things together. And he realized the moral component to this experiment that we have been having here. And so what scares me about this is that oftentimes we can be motivated by our fears, or motivated by our prejudices, and we can overreact without backing off and saying, wait a minute, where is this going to take us? If the laws pass in Indiana, what's going to be the outcome? Or if the laws not pass in what's going to be the outcome? And so what I'm not telling you what's right and what's wrong there. I mean, you guys are smarter than I am, but what we want to do is find out what is RIFRA really about, and what are the issues. And in my opinion, talking to people, Michael Horowitz is the primary one who wrote it. It never had to do with giving people the right to discriminate against other people. It was protect religious freedom, and so I specifically asked some questions. I said, if a person owned a bakery and a gay couple came in and they wanted to buy a cake at the bakery, would they be able to do that? And the answer was yes, they could buy a cake. I mean, anybody, if you buy it, wherever you go, you can buy, anybody can buy a cake. But if you ask the baker to bake a cake for a gay wedding, is there a difference? And the response was yes, there's a difference, because participating in a wedding is an endorsement of the wedding. And so, I mean these are tough issues, and so you wonder where this is coming, and I think we've got two groups in our country who are intolerant. One are some radical fundamentalists. So if you don't believe like they do, they want you to be punished. But we've also got some radical people on the left. If you don't believe what they do, they want you to be punished. They're not just saying we want freedom, but we want to punish you. And so I think where Baptists have been in this whole conversation for centuries, we've been struggling with this. We talk about it. We discuss it. We try to see through it, and we try to give guidance that's going to help our children, our grandchildren. And I think I can slip on through life, and get by. But I really am worried about our grandkids and what will be the situation that they're facing. And so I really challenge us to be involved in the conversation.
Well, let me press you a little bit on that point, because you just said it's easy to slip by. Yeah. And there is also a voice that's saying, okay, the culture wars are over. We've lost the culture wars. We ought to just try to be the church and forget about all the cultural wars. Yeah. How would you respond to that?
It's crazy. I mean, it's insane. I mean, it's suicide, it's unbiblical, it's irresponsible, it's lazy.
Could you say what you really think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're jerks, they're self-centered. I mean, we do live within a culture, and so I think, again, like even, I don't want this thing to. We're not about the gay marriage issue. I mean, that's not. I mean, we're about religious freedom, but all these things have implications, and even the court, the decisions that's in front of the court today, that has to do with a national recognition, a redefinition of marriage. It's a really big thing, and so we need to be saying, okay, what are the implications? And so a lot of times, I think the main thing that Christians are driven by is compassion. And so every church I've pastored had gay members. My position on traditional marriage is exactly the way it was when I was 18 years old. You know, I believe in the biblical definition of marriage. I don't believe there's any out for that. I think even divorce, I think in a day of easy divorce, we've just really undermined the church and so undermined society. But I've done funerals of about 6 people who died of AIDS. And for 2 or 3 of them, it was a very redemptive time during the end of their life where they were able to come back to their family and their church family and their faith. And so, boy, these are tough things. But when I'm preaching a passage like 1 Corinthians 15 or Ephesians 5 or something like that, and let the Scripture say what the Scripture says, I know that there are some mothers and daddies who have gay kids that are sitting out there during the sermon and they're hurting. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times we're driven by compassion. We say we don't want to see people hurt, and so we want to affirm them in whatever decisions that they may be making. But I think sometimes we need to stop back and say, okay, what if marriage is redefined at the federal level? What are going to be some of the implications for that? And one of the questions is, okay, are preachers going to be protected? My gut feeling is initially, yes, but we also know how boundaries are pushed. But initially, I think we're going to be protected if we can. I think ultimately the church will be in danger of losing tax credit, which is a whole ball game in itself. But immediately, not down the road, immediately though, one of the implications that was asked by one of the judges was, what would happen in a Christian, they were asking someone speaking for the redefinition of marriage, so what would happen if a Christian university, if a gay couple asked to live in student housing at a Christian university, would they be allowed to do that? Or not allowed, but would the school have to give them that? And this person says, well, that's a good question. And so if the people advocating that wouldn't give us confidence ahead of time that this is a real possibility, then you know it is a real possibility. And so I think we need to be informed. We need to ask these tough questions, and where is this going to take us down the road? And we need to be very careful about being Republican or Democrat. I mean, I think we should be very involved in politics and all, but especially like on Facebook or in our preaching, we need to be very as nonpartisan as we can be, because we've got to speak to the people in power. And that's why I really admire Frank Wolf. When Gingrich was nominated for Speaker of the House, Frank Wolf was one of the few people who voted against it. So here's a Republican congressman voting against the guy who's going to make up the committees in Congress. But Wolf had asked some questions about character, and he wasn't given satisfactory answers. And so he voted his conscience, even though that really isolated him from so many of his colleagues. And so I think that's a good example for us of what James Madison was saying, is that it's about conscience. You know, if we don't have the freedom of conscience and the freedom of religious expression in our country, then we're going down a road that we have not gone down before as a nation, and who knows where that will live.
We're living in shifting cultural times, and while we don't necessarily need to be extreme in our responses, we still need to be assertive and express our beliefs, fight for our right to practice our faith in a way that's consistent with our doctrines, our beliefs, what we believe the Bible teaches us. It's going to be a rockier road ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, and it always has been. I think for authentic Christianity, again, 70% of the people are being persecuted today. But let me give an example of a group that I think are doing it right, and that's the Baptists in Lebanon. Now, Christians are very much a minority in Lebanon. Evangelicals are very much a minority among the Christians in Lebanon. And so they're a very small group. But our Southern Baptist missionaries that went there back in the 60s and 70s, they started the Baptist Academy there, a school, K through 12. They started the seminary and all these other kind of ministries. Well, they're still going, but now they're led by Lebanese Baptists. And I know all of them. I've been there, been to those schools. This school, this K through 12th grade in Beirut, is they've got 1,300 students. 93% of them are Muslim. And yet the school is thoroughly Christian. Now, you know, we're embarrassed to put Baptist on our name here. This school is in the middle of the Muslim sector of Beirut, and the title, the name of their school is Beirut Baptist Academy. Isn't that incredible? I mean, even that is a bold statement. Well, these Muslims, they'll send their kids there, and they'll say, oh, our daughter is a Muslim, so she needs to wear a head covering. And they say, no, we're a Christian school. You know, there are a lot of Muslim schools around there, but here we're Christian. So they're authentically Christian. And they say, it's Ramadan, we need to have special meals. I say, no, we're Christian. You know, they're going to take New Testament, they're going to take Old Testament, they're going to have to go to chapel. But we're a Christian school. So they've developed this Christian school. Well, during the 7 Days War, the first thing that they did was they locked all of their doors to protect themselves. And then while they were in there, they asked a dangerous question that I don't recommend we ever ask, and that was, what would Jesus do? You know? So they said, what would Jesus do? And they said, we should open the doors. So they opened their doors and they invited these people in, Muslims and all people, and they bandaged their sores, they fed them, they gave them places to sleep. And so now a Muslim militia guards Beirut Baptist Academy. They've never asked to be, but they do it on their own because they said, that's our school. And so to me, and by the way, one of the things that we're advocating at Wilberforce is that there's a network already in place where we want to put Christian schools in these refugee camps. There are 300,000 children who are in refugee camps in Lebanon, not counting Jordan and Turkey and within Syria and Iraq themselves. We can start. Already one has been started in Lebanon. There's one ready to be started in Baghdad and one ready to be started in Syria. But K through 6th grade, authentically Christian with excellent education, meeting educational standards. Because to me, an 8-year-old kid in one of these refugee camps is ripe pickings for ISIS. Mm-hmm. They're angry, their daddies have been killed, their mothers have been raped, they're not in school, and so they welcome us to start schools. There's no government baggage about starting schools in refugee camps. I mean, the Minister of Education in Lebanon is welcoming us to come in and put schools there. We can use Christian curriculum. It's not going to be just throw a soccer ball and get a flannel graph. I mean, these are going to be schools, and a lot of the teachers are going to be the teachers who are in exile to do it. And so this is one of the things that we're working on, because I believe that just as an 8-year-old kid is ripe pickings for ISIS, I believe an 8-year-old kid is ripe pickings for Jesus. And if we're going to change the culture of the Middle East, then let's go into where these children are, and let's, we don't need to send a bunch of North Americans over there to teach these schools. I mean, we need to resource them to be able to teach their own schools and share the hope of Christ with these kids, and pray that what happened in England with Wilberforce and those will spring up in places like Iraq and Syria.
Well, I know an important part of what's going on right now is we really need to get the conversation before more folks. Yeah. It's still so early in the process. You're still trying to figure out, okay, what are the specific things that we need to do?
Yeah.
But an important part is getting the conversation in front of more folks. And I want to do that right now in here by just opening it up for questions.
Good deal.
And let them ask whatever question you might want to ask.
Our comments.
Right.
You've
Yeah.
already asked my question, Tom.
Okay.
And you answered it. I appreciate it. I just, because this is such the deal about, well, we're post-Christian. We just, let's just forget all that. Let's just mellow out here a little bit. I think Christianity in America is eating up with that, and especially, some of us who should be on the cutting edge of preaching Jesus. It's just like just give it up.
Well, you were more.
The response to that was, because I think we're, surrendering when we
You were much more to the point in the car coming over here. You want to resurrect that conversation?
Sure. Last week, James Dobson, and I appreciate so much of the good stuff he's done. Mark, see you later. Appreciate so much the contributions that he makes. But last week he was saying the culture war is over, Christians are going to be persecuted in America, and I'm going, I hadn't heard the whistle. Why is it over? I mean, why aren't we fighting? The Luke 4:18 scripture that I talked about the gospel to the poor. I believe if the church gets busy doing what Jesus was busy doing, that we can still have a tremendous impact on our culture. But I think a lot of the negative things about Christianity is because so much of Christianity has been very selfish and indulging and accommodating culture. I mean, we're furious about the gay issues, but yet we have serial polygamy in our churches with people just getting divorces and the breakdown of the family and the lack of responsibility of the dads. And I think if we begin to live authentic Christian lives, then the opportunity for us to make a difference in our country is still significant. Again, when I know you guys had the thing with the mayor here, and it was a real tough time, and the whole country was focused on how the mayor and how Christians would respond in Houston. And I'm glad that people responded. I'm glad there was a response. But I told Tom, I said, I'll be excited when the church gets as outraged about Christians being killed in Nigeria, Iraq, Eritrea, Pakistan, Sudan. When we become as outraged about Christians being killed there as we are about these challenges to our own religious freedoms here, to me, we've got to fight these domestic issues. But when I've been there, I've talked to a mama who lost her 2 sons. I see them living in these conditions. I've sat down with girls, even 5 of the girls who were captured by Boko Haram. I interviewed them. They jumped off the truck. Their 200 friends didn't. They're still in captivity. But these 5 girls, I met with them, beautiful 18-year-old girls who should be right at a great time in their life, and they get kidnapped, by ISIS. And so I'll be glad when we get outraged about, and the Yazidis. I'm just as concerned about the Yazidis as I am about the Christians that are there. And a lot of times even more so because they don't know Jesus, they don't know Christ. And so, and I think we're at a place where people are hungry. I genuinely believe there can be a Christian resurgence in the Middle East if we start acting like Christians in the Middle East, and if we go over there and share the love and the mercy of Jesus and the hope of Christ and invest in these children.
Yeah.
I'm not expecting to be arrested and carried away anytime real soon, but what are the avenues or the channels that we should look for as far as our religious freedom being taken from us? What are some of the ways that that's going to happen as you see it?
That's a great question. I think we just need to be alert, at those issues. I think the RFRA issue is something that we need to be very concerned about and informed about. And one of the tough things about RFRA is that each state may voice it in a different way, so there's not one answer for every state. But I think that's an important issue. I think I got a long email from a really good friend of mine who's a member of First Baptist Midland that was really upset that we were fighting for religious freedom for everybody, because he thinks the Muslims are the problem globally. And to underestimate radical Islam is foolish. I mean, it is one of the major problems around the world. But again, I believe our forefathers fought for religious freedom from everyone, Catholics and Protestants, non-believers and believers, Christians and Jews. And I think continuing, and I think also dealing with it in our sermons and biblically, I think it's important for us to take these tough texts and talk about the importance of, like the Hebrews 13:3, remembering the persecuted church. So just being alert and being involved. There are some very specific things that we've tried to do internationally, and I'll try to give a quick answer on this. But in Romans it says, how will they believe in Him whom they've not heard? And so one of the things is, how can we help people to hear? And so obviously the internet is the Roman roads of our day, and I think it's one of the third most important periods of history. I think Jesus came at a time when the roads made the world accessible, and the common language of Greek made it accessible. So it was a perfect time for Jesus to come. Then I think during the Reformation Renaissance period, the same thing with the printing press, and it got it out. Well, now we've got the internet. But the problem is that so many of our societies are closed societies, and China is a perfect example of that. You go to China today, and Tiananmen Square never happened. You look it up on any of their stuff, and it's just a park with trees and ponds, and Tiananmen Square never happened. They stopped any information about the protests in Hong Kong getting over into mainland China. They put them in the dark. Well, we found a way to circumvent internet firewalls. That it's a Chinese man who lives in the States, developed a system that's been up for 10 years, and China has tried everything they can do to keep this from happening, to keep him from doing that. So we went to him, we met with him a number of times, we went to him and said, what would you need to have the kind of capacity for Bob Fu to preach at a church in Texas and 500,000 Chinese hear the sermon on their cell phones? And so he came back and he showed us what it would take for that to happen. So we took it to the Broadcasting Board of Governors. That's the agency that the U.S. uses to deal with these issues like circumvention of the internet firewall. Their annual budget is $750 million a year. What percentage of their budget do you think do they spend on things like circumvention of internet firewalls? Yeah, I would have hoped that they would spend 90, and then they spend 1%. 60% is on shortwave radio. Primarily do Voice of America stuff, these towers and getting it out, and I'm not even sure those are good. And so he said it would take about $20 million to increase the capacity for servers and IP addresses for an event like that to happen. Well, we found out that the person on the Appropriations Committee that would have dealt with that would be Kay Granger, who's the congresswoman from Fort Worth. So we got a group of about 15 of us, and the two primary people were me and Rabbi Ralph Mecklenburger, who's become a very good friend of mine. And so here, the Jews and the Baptists in Fort Worth put this coalition together, and we went to Congresswoman and asked her if she would bring this up. And she brought she thought the whole county was up in arms about this internet firewall thing, and it's just a handful of us. But so she brought strong language, got it in the 2014 budget and the 2015 budget, and the BBG still did nothing. We got a letter with senators and congressmen signing it saying, spend that money on circumvention of the internet firewall. And they still haven't done it. I met with their key guy 3 times face to face. I met with the people in the Appropriations Committee. But what would happen if we had networks of churches out here that are being informed And at the same time that we're doing something with Congresswoman Granger, a group of Christians are doing something with Senator Congresswoman Nita Lowey, who is the Democrat part, are with the senators that are on that committee. It doesn't take a lot of influence. It just takes being at the right place at the right time to come together to speak up for these issues and to bring access to people in the dark areas of China or Iran or Pakistan would be such great comfort. So we want to give some very specific things that you can do like that, starting the schools in the Middle East, or helping us with internet firewalls, those things, and trying to, being in DC, that's why our office is there, so we can pick up on any legislation that's coming along that might be like RFRA or these other things that, another thing that just happened last week was Congress had passed a law to create the position of a special envoy for religious minorities in the Middle East. And it passed in August, and the president signed it, but it's never been filled. And so we got 60, a network of 50 or 60 nonprofits to sign this letter that we wrote, and a group of atheists was on it, Hindus, Muslims. This really diverse group co-signed this letter with us that we sponsored, and then we took it to Congress. They got 43 senators and congressmen that signed it, saying we want this position filled, envoy, and so Congressman Wolf said we've been sending letters to the administration for all these years, and he said we never get a response back, regardless who's in office. We immediately got a response back, and right now there's a conference call going on. I couldn't be on it because I'm here. Conference call. The White House immediately responded and said, let's talk. Let's have this conversation. And so we're engaged in a conversation with them about that now. Well, lo and behold, the person that's head of the faith-based work of the White House is Melissa Rogers, a Baptist. And known her for years. And so she's very open to this. And so it's just trying to find out these people in positions of changing and getting information out to you. I know that was a long answer to a simple question, but I think these are very important issues. I think the way the Supreme Court acts on the marriage thing is going to create a real challenging environment. A lot of those, and I don't believe it's a done deal yet. No. I believe that there's still, I think Kennedy's a swing vote on that, and who knows? Yeah.
Because the law works off precedent, and there's small things that are happening within the states, like that couple. I don't know if you caught it or not. The couple that in Oregon denied the LBGT couple the right to purchase a cake from them, turned around, they sued them, won the lawsuit. Then they were fined. I think it was somewhere $135,000, which to some category would be the mindset would be that's minimal, but the reality is law operates off precedent. So every time there's a decision made on one side or the other, it builds that point of precedent. I think the challenge becomes when the precedent is on the opposite side of faith. That's when you need to be more and more concerned. I mean, because these are real baby steps that are happening right now. Yeah. And ultimately, one of the major swings is what will happen with the Supreme Court, because it ultimately sets precedent throughout the nation. And I hope. Yeah. It looks like they're not going to do anything with it. Yeah. Possibly because of the questions that are coming out. But
it's been a more rigorous debate than I thought it would have been. But another thing is chaplains. What can a chaplain, a military chaplain, say, and what can a military chaplain not say? Yeah. And again, I mean, this is like Daniel, the head of chaplaincy for the Air Force is a Baptist now, and he's endorsed by Texas Baptists. I mean, we're the ones that endorsed him as a chaplain, and we've had conversations with him because a lot of what's happening, one Jewish atheistic or agnostic lawyer in Colorado Springs has brought more of the lawsuits against the Air Force than anyone else, and he's never been in a courtroom. I mean, he just sits and he lives with his mother, which says a lot. But anyway, so he'll hear something that's happening and he'll file suit, and they'll just back off. They won't deal with it because they're afraid they're going to be sued. Well, recently one of the things that happened was these cadets have a little whiteboard outside their door, and they can write something on the whiteboard. Well, one of the cadets wrote a scripture. And so this guy files a lawsuit, and going to go against it. Well, man, as a result, the Liberty Institute that takes on these cases pro bono from Dallas found out about that, and they took this guy to court, and they won. And so when Kelly Shackelford, the CEO of Liberty, went and visited the dorm, every whiteboard had a scripture on it, among these cadets. And so a lot of these things, I mean, he was within his right to put the scripture on there. And so rather than just running from it, so what we want to do is to get a toolbox that we can send to chaplains or to pastors and say, these are things that your church can do, and these are things that you shouldn't do. And so we can speak, yeah.
I was at a meeting a few weeks ago, and a voice from the back of the room, I didn't know who he was, but he said a couple had adopted a baby in their church and came to have it dedicated. And the church had to make a decision on it because it was a lesbian couple. And so their decision-making process was, do we put this couple up on our church and say that we endorse this type of thing, or do we not do that? And so I'm just saying that in our churches, we have hard decisions we're going to have to face, and they're going to get harder and harder.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be called more names than we've ever been called before.
Well, I First Baptist Midland, just within a couple of months ago, I'm not there any longer, but they had a girl who had, she was not married, and she had a baby and wanted the baby to be dedicated, in our baby dedication service, but wanted her boyfriend, or the father of the baby, who's not even her boyfriend anymore, to stand there with her. So he was the mother and the baby and the boyfriend, to do blessings. And the ministerial staff elected not to do that. I mean, we've had a number of single moms that have come, and you pray for them and the baby. But the ministerial staff's response was this would be an endorsement of that arrangement, which one of the things we asked them, are you going to raise this child in the love of Christ? I mean, we asked them to make a response, and so it'd be hypocritical if they were pretending that they're going to raise that child like that when they're not even committed to each other. And so it's tough. I mean, those are issues. And Facebook took that thing and they ripped the church up and down, and it looked like just a bunch of hate mongers are there. And I was just thinking, oh, I'm glad I'm not there. But we're going to constantly have those kinds of issues. That's why we just need to be as thoroughly immersed in Scripture and walk with Christ.
Church in Lebanon, where they said, "Hey, we're Christian.
Yeah.
We're Christian.
Yeah.
We're biblical. That.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. We can't.
Yeah.
Like this."
Well, let me.
I was just going to say, this current generation doesn't see it like that. I mean, these young people, I was on, I shared up Franklin Graham's post the other day on Facebook about what, the judge is hearing about, gay marriage. And this guy's probably about 26. He was in my youth group when he was growing up. And all of a sudden he started slamming the church and said, well, you're talking about organization, get special rights, they don't have to pay taxes, they don't have to do this. Why should we give them special privileges? And this is a kid who's been around the church his whole life, served in the military, has come out of that. And all of a sudden he started taking it in this wild direction. And of course I started giving him scripture, and he said, don't give me scripture on a book that is filled with contradictions. Of course, now I'm getting into an apologetics conversation with him.
Yeah, good.
And then I finally reeled it back and I said, this post was about gay marriage. It wasn't about, well, he said, well, just to be clear, I'm talking about taxing the church. And I said, well, this was about gay marriage, brother. Mm-hmm. And and so it went on several different deals. But what I see with the youth nowadays, because they have literally no biblical foundation, even though they have the greatest access to the Bible of any generation prior to them. Yeah. And so their foundation is not built on a biblical stance. And I'm not seeing it as a youth pastor being in our American church, the way we've designed it with adults, youth, children. I'm not seeing a lot of youth pastors. I know lots of them around our country, and there are some of us who's like, man, we got to preach the gospel, but so much of the time we have to fall back and teach fundamentals.
Yeah.
Because their foundation simply isn't
Oh,
there.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then so most of the time, me and my brother were talking about this, who's based in Atlanta. We have to go all the way back to the cornerstone because, and dig that out, throw that out, and replace it with the gospel, because they don't even have a biblical knowledge of the Old Testament stories, how they tie together, how it leads to Christ. And so that's what concerns me the most, because I'm with this current generation, and I shudder to think, because I feel like I'm 42, I feel like mine was probably about the last that had that fundamental biblical foundation growing up, moving forward. And Lord only knows what the next generation or the two after me is going to do.
And so actually I think we're living in a good time, because I think we have more in common with the New Testament church today than we do with the church in 1975.
I agree.
And so this is a dynamic time to live, and I think Luke 15 will make so much more sense to us today than it would have in earlier days, or just you pick a scripture. So and I think a lot of times it's been hard to make a distinction between patriotism and commitment to Christ, or we've so interwoven that we don't know what we believe because we're an American, or what we believe because it's God's word. And
Zane, let me, we'll let you ask your question, then we'll wrap it up. You're going to still be around, and folks can continue to mingle and ask questions, but Zane, go
and sure,
ahead.
give me your email address if you want these Wilberforce alerts. So I don't know where they can sign up for that, or
Outside, they've already done
okay.
that.
All right, good.
Zane?
Yeah, just kind of interested. I look around the room, we do, Tom's good about leading us for learning opportunities. And if we do one on websites, you get a lot of young pastors, and that sort of stuff. And I look around the room and see a bunch of gray-headed old men here with me, and I'm 67, so I'm talking about myself. Is it concerning that this resonates with older pastors, and we don't have a lot of the leaders of younger churches here? Is that just a quirk of this room, or are you finding that it doesn't resonate except with some older guys?
Well, I think they knew who the speaker was, so that's why you guys, they didn't. But actually, I mentioned I spoke at ETBU at their graduation Saturday, and students were totally engaged with it. I mean, I just stood in line and talked to them after the graduation. Some of them want to go do an internship, or they, I think this very much, particularly international religious freedom. I mean, we can get bogged down on domestic religious freedom. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of passion or interest in that. But international religious freedom, I think our students are very engaged in that and are willing to take risk and sacrifice, to help their brothers and sisters in Christ around the world. So I've been very pleased with that.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And please pray for us. We desperately want your prayers, and appreciate any help that you can give us.
Well, we do want to do that, and I also want to say thank you for being here today. Thank you for what you're doing. You're bringing the conversation to us. You're forcing us to look at these issues. You're challenging us not just to think about ourselves, but to think about what's going on worldwide. I mean, it's real easy for us to get caught up in what's happening here, especially in Houston, with all the attention that's been brought here in the last few months. But you're broadening the conversation to say, there's stuff going on around the world, and we need to be concerned about what's happening here and protect that. But we also need to be aware of what's going on around the world and to respond, and I appreciate that. Yeah. I know it was a significant transition in your life that led you to this point. Yeah. Just knowing that says this is an important issue.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Tom.